This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
African Union focuses on refugees and internally displaced persons. Parties to the C.A.R. peace accord call for formation of Truth Commission. South Africans react to President Ramaphosa's second State of the Nation address delivered last night. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta live in Nairobi. For those of you joining us across the continent and around the world, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside Uche Okoronkwo, who has our business headlines.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. India's Bharti Airtel unit set to merge with Telecom Kenya. And South Africa's retail sector faces heavy strain amidst a weakening economy. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Richard.
Thank you, Uche. All right, we begin in Ethiopia. Security in Ethiopia capital Addis Ababa has been beefed up as dignitaries and heads of state from across the continent gather for the annual 32nd African Union Summit. The Continental Summit, which kicked off on Thursday, is focused on the theme refugee and internally displaced persons. Statistics from the UNHCR indicate that sub-Saharan Africa hosts more than 26% of the world's 25.4 million refugees. Human rights campaigners are now asking the AU to take concrete steps to address the issue. The AU meeting is also set to reveal the long-awaited design of a passport for African countries to aid free movement of its people. And as leaders at the African Union Summit discuss durable solutions to forced displacement in Africa, Uganda says it's prepared to take in another 75,000 refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo. This despite concern that the Ebola virus could spread to the country. Isabel Nakiria reports. Let's take a look.
It's a struggle to make ends meet. Grace Asio ekes out living by farming on a small piece of land at the Alema refugee settlement in northwestern Uganda. This is one of the benefits Grace was given when she came to Uganda as a refugee 6 years ago.
Life was difficult when I arrived from South Sudan, but host communities here gave me seeds, and using this land given to me by the Ugandan government, I started growing crops, and life is better now.
Uganda's open policy of welcoming refugees has been praised by the international community. Refugees are free to work and also benefit from healthcare and education. But aid agencies are dealing with another influx from the DRC caused by uncertainty around the recent election, as well as fear of Ebola spreading from that country.
We are working in a very delicate situation where we have the Ebola emergency also ongoing. So we have business continuity plan in place. If in case we receive people who have been in contact with the affected people or who might have been affected themselves, which means that in case we receive any Ebola cases, the business should not stop.
Uganda hosts about 1.4 million refugees, most of them from South Sudan. The government says it needs continued support from the international community to be able to sustain the growing numbers. While aid agencies are switching to sustainable programs where refugees learn new things like carpentry and farming, the government is urging regional partners to find durable solutions to the conflicts in the region. As for refugees like Grace Asir, she says she will keep income coming in from her farm produce and only return to South Sudan if she's sure the war is over. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
And to the latest on the newly signed peace deal in the Central African African Republic. The pact signed between government and 14 rebel groups is calling for a truth commission within 90 days. The parties to the deal are also said to have committed to the setting up of joint security patrols with soldiers and members of armed groups for a period of 24 months.
Details of the peace deal have not yet been publicly released. They are being kept under wraps until the last three parties to the accord sign it. Reports indicate that the accord spells out important confidence-building measures and calls for setting up Truth and Reconciliation Commission, one of the most important provisions. Parties to the deal are also said to have committed to setting up joint security patrols with soldiers and members of the armed groups for 2 years. The accord is the 8th attempt in nearly 6 years to try and forge peace in the country.
En veillant au respect de la volonté populaire.
In ensuring respect for the people's will, I pledge to fully support the process of dialogue to achieve a just and lasting peace among the constituents of the Central African people.
Both the African Union and the United Nations have commended both parties for their commitment and willingness to compromise.
C'est pour réaffirmer l'indépendance.
It is to reaffirm the independence, the sovereignty of C.A.R, but also to call to witness the sovereign people of the C.A.R that we want this agreement to be signed here in Bangui and that the signatory parties appropriate it as it should be.
Et que les parties signataires s'approprient.
You have lived divided from the four horizons of your beautiful and great country, the Central African Republic, but you have undoubtedly returned to Bangui as a single people, stronger and determined together to meet the challenges of a common destiny. This is the hope that we nurture.
The accord was initiated in the Sudanese capital Khartoum on Tuesday before being signed in the capital Bangui on Wednesday by some militia leaders and President Faustin Archange Touadera. The three other signatories are expected to sign the deal during the upcoming Africa Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN.
The United States is scaling back its deployment of military assistance to Cameroon. The U.S. State Department says the decision was made because of allegations that Cameroonian military committed human rights violations. Now, human rights groups say civilians have been targeted in the country's far north, southwest, and northwest regions. The U.S. currently has about 300 troops in Cameroon providing assistance and training to fight extremism. The U.S. is calling on Cameroon to provide greater transparency about the allegations. However, the commander of the U.S. Africa Command has told a congressional committee that the West African nation has been a good partner, and the U.S. ambassador to Yaoundé held talks with Paul Biya about the rights violation allegations. Okay, for more on this, we are joined by CGTN's Daniel Ranges in Washington. Daniel, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Daniel, what can you tell us? What more can you tell us, rather, and exactly what has the U.S. withdrawn?
Well, the military assistance is always staged, so some pieces of equipment are for training purposes. Some pieces of equipment are to upgrade existing ones, like they're upgrading a Cessna aircraft that will be used by the Rapid Intervention Battalion of the Cameroonian forces. That now is suspended. They have a C-130 aircraft that was providing training and upgrading spare parts, a Cessna aircraft, various radar, armored vehicle, helicopter training. These kind of things that actually help with the practical arrangements that the Cameroonians have to use equipment, upgrade equipment, and train on that equipment. Those are the things that the U.S. has been focused on.
Okay, so could you clarify exactly what the American officials are saying about why they took this decision?
They took this decision because they believe there are credible reports that some members of the Cameroonian military in the north and southwest have been committing egregious human rights abuses. That is backed up, for example, by Human Rights Watch reports throughout 2018, suggesting that in the Anglophone regions there were extrajudicial killings, that there were allegations of torture, and that people's homes were set on light. Those were allegations made on both sides of the conflict.
And how do you think it compromises the ability to target militants, in your opinion?
Well, from the headline, it seems as if, the US is sort of going away from Cameroon, but that's not the case at all. They're still very engaged. They want to continue to work with Cameroon to target Boko Haram and these ISIL splinter groups that have emerged. It's very much in their interest to do so. They've been effective working with the multinational forces there, particularly the Cameroonians. So they don't want to let that go. They provide intelligence and surveillance, reconnaissance missions. So that usually means drone aircraft that the US is piloting and then providing information to troops on the ground. They additionally provide some troops in a position where they're actually helping them in operations, sort of in the background, but definitely on the ground. That is much less a major part of their operations, but in this case it certainly does affect them, because under US law you are supposed to not provide any support to any units or individuals that have been proven to be committing human rights abuses. So the US military has to be very cognizant of that. But as I say, it still remains a priority that the US military is on the ground. And let's not forget that the French forces are also there, and they have continued to make a commitment to providing support to the Cameroonian military.
Daniel Ranges reporting from Washington. Thank you for that update and report. The United Nations Security Council has renewed UN sanctions on Sudan, keeping in place an arms embargo as well as asset freezes and travel bans. The unanimous vote came despite disagreement over whether to ease sanctions over the improving situation on the ground and if sexual violence should be added as a criteria for targeted sanctions. Here's CGTN's Richard Nta with the latest.
While the UN Security Council continues to believe that the situation in Sudan is still a threat to peace and security, there is acknowledgement of progress made towards some measure of stability. Even as it extended the sanctions mandate on Sudan, the Security Council reiterated its support for the UN and African Union hybrid operation in Darfur, known as UNAMID, in its transition from peacekeeping to peace building and development. In a sign of growing confidence in the peace process, UNAMID's troop levels is being reduced by more than half to just over 4,000 ahead of a planned exit next year. But there remains significant concerns, especially about sanctions compliance. The panel of experts that oversee sanctions on Sudan have reported that the arms embargo continued to be violated by the government of Sudan, the rebel group known as the Justice and Equality Movement, as well as by the government of South Sudan, which has backed rebel groups. Security Council members also don't agree on the overall situation in Sudan and whether sanctions need to be reviewed and eased back. Also contentious was a push to add sexual violence as a criteria for targeted sanctions, reportedly based on a recommendation from the UN envoy on sexual violence in conflict, Pramila Patten. Now, Western nations were in favor, but Russia opposed. And Sudan's representative to the United Nations also strongly objected, saying the assessment on sexual violence uses unreliable information and does not reflect the reality on the ground. Nta, CGTN, New York.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered his State of the Nation address in Cape Town on Thursday evening. He spent 2 hours speaking to the nation and both houses of parliament, outlining what had been achieved and plans for the next 12 months. Angela Coppola reports.
Much of Ramaphosa's speech was focused on the economy, jobs and education, but analysts say it didn't go far enough. It was by some distance far more comprehensive and detailed than what he delivered last year. And I think that's to be welcomed, and it's a step in the right direction. However, the speech, when you actually look at the content, didn't seem to involve the kind of structural reforms that the president has been intimating. It was more of the same on a lot of big issues, the economy, education, corruption.
Analysts were also expecting clarity on the situation at the state-owned entities.
It maybe wasn't as dramatic as I suppose some people hoped for, and in addition I also don't think there was a lot of clarity around what the plans are at this point in time. It feels like they're buying a bit of time in terms of some of the decisions that they've made.
On the announcement concerning the unbundling of Eskom, Ramaphosa was careful not to mention the wage bill or retrenchments.
Does rebundling mean that jobs are going to be cut, or does it actually mean it's a way of creating more positions in Eskom, because you are in effect multiplying by 3 a number of positions that are there before if you separate it?
One of the key concerns for ratings agencies is the bloated size of the country's cabinet and state departments. Ramaphosa had promised action in last year's address.
I think the fact that he hasn't delivered on the hard details on that front is because there's an election, and he's likely to cut a lot of departments and ministers, and that's going to lead to some intense unhappiness.
While the speech was about the economy, economists don't expect growth rates to exceed 1.7%.
Our own forecast is for 1.4% for this year, and I would say that I still stick to that, because the first half of the year is going to be a repeat of much of the same. Not a lot can change actually in this first half until after the elections.
The 2-hour-long speech was a little short on detail and fundamental change in direction, but at least there were some action points. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A relationship that looked to be on the mend is showing signs of fraying again. European Union and Zimbabwe ties are under the spotlight again as EU foreign ministers prepare to meet to discuss a response to the situation in Zimbabwe following recent protests and a violent crackdown by security forces. CGTN's Fry Walker to you looks at the state of relations between Harare and Brussels.
Apart from Zimbabwe's open for business, the other constant since Emmerson Mnangagwa took over has been the need to normalize relations with the West. Things were headed that way for a while, but scathing condemnation of a heavy-handed response to anti-government protests in January may have changed course and threatens a return to a bitter standoff.
They were looking for the slightest opportunity for any mishap to happen in the country to reconfirm and re-establish sanctions. The EU foreign policy on Zimbabwe has not changed in the last 20 years. They were simply waiting for an opportunity to emphasize what they've been saying. We are still paying for the land reform. That is very clear.
But some believe even before the recent unrest, President Mnangagwa's government spurned an opportunity by failing to implement promised reforms.
The international community, particularly the UK, which was starting to cozy up to the Harare government, Harare regime, the Harare administration, is very disappointed, because of, now they are now saying that there is more rhetoric than action.
The situation can still be salvaged.
We need genuine dialogue. We need to agree on the set of reforms that we as a nation are going to push forward. And that way we'll be able to then convince the international community we have found each other as Zimbabweans and we are working together for the good of our country.
Talks between political rivals are underway amidst exhortations to put national interests first.
We should not lose focus. Let us focus on re-engaging as far as we can, but not tether Zimbabwe's development to validation by the British Parliament or by the European Union.
Something Mnangagwa has been quick to impress upon his counterparts.
Outsiders can only come in to assist us, but the prime responsibility for our country's development remains our own responsibility.
With more inter-party talks to chart a way forward on the cards, it could be said Zimbabwe is at a crossroads. The coming months will determine just which way it goes. Farang Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching Africa Live on CGTN. We've got a lot more news coming your way, including Sierra Leone declares emergency over rape and sexual assault. Military operations intensify in Nigeria ahead of national elections.
may aniga waxa suuragal ah adduunku inay iga haystaan fikir qaldan waxa suuragal ah wax badan in laga gudbiyo waxa suuragal ah wax badan oo shaqo ku in leeyahay asaga shaqo.
Well, he was really the founding father of piracy.
Never fisherman, just cashed in on the free for all.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. On a sad note, let's go to Sierra Leone, where President Julius Maada Bio has declared rape and sexual violence a national emergency. The move comes after a young girl was brutally raped by her uncle. The 5-year-old girl was left paralyzed from the waist down. The incident has prompted a public outcry in the capital, Freetown, against rape and sexual violence. Many activists are calling for tougher rape laws. CGTN Suli Shabalala has more on that story.
Sierra Leone is helping women fight for justice against rape and sexual assault.
Each month, hundreds of cases of rape and sexual assault are being reported in this country. These despicable crimes of sexual violence are being committed against our own women, children, and even babies. Some of the fatalities are as young as 3 months old. 70% of the survivors of this traumatic experience are under the age 15.
Activists have been for months campaigning to combat the scourge that has left many victims traumatized. Sierra Leone's President Julius Maada Bio has heard the cries and is calling for an end to sexual violence and impunity surrounding it.
On this note, ladies and gentlemen, I therefore declare rape and sexual violence as national emergency. With this declaration, I've also directed the following: that all government hospitals must provide free medical treatment and certificates to every rape victim and sexual abuse.
According to police statistics, reported cases of sexual and gender-based violence nearly doubled last year to over 8,500, a third of which involved minors.
With immediate effect, sexual penetration of minors is punishable by life imprisonment.
Gender-based violence is traditionally seen as a taboo topic in Sierra Leone. Only 12 years ago, Parliament passed its first gender equality laws in 46 years of independence. Implementation of these policies has been slow, and law enforcement agencies have been hampered by inadequate resources. In December, Sierra Leone's First Lady led a demonstration in the capital to raise awareness on the issue. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's military said it has launched an investigation into illegal shipment of arms and military uniforms ahead of the elections. The military has warned that any civilian found in possession of military uniforms or weapons during the elections would be treated as a terrorist. It has also banned off-duty soldiers from wearing military uniforms and carrying weapons during the voting period. CGTN's Kalechi Amekala has more.
No military personnel are expected to fraternize with any political parties
Strong-worded caution from the defense spokesman, not just for those plotting violence, but his own officers. Brigadier General John Adjim's reaction is coming in the wake of heightened concerns of election violence. Nigerians will be headed to the polls next weekend to elect their next set of political leaders. The defense spokesman says he's obtained information some weapons and military uniforms were being smuggled into the country by those plotting to disrupt the elections.
Already, the military is inundated with the allegation of illegal importation of military equipment and uniforms into the country, which is being investigated. Similarly, there is credible intelligence report that some people are planning to scuttle free and fair elections in some parts of the country. The defense headquarters wishes to warn such group of people to desist from such unpatriotic acts. We would like to caution that anyone caught, be they serving or retired military personnel or civilians, no matter highly placed, will be arrested and treated in accordance with the extant laws of the land.
Nearly 100 political parties are competing for political offices, but the race is fiercely being contested by the ruling All Progressives Congress and Nigeria's oldest political party, the PDP. It's not the first time concerns about a deliberate plot to disrupt the election is being raised. Nigeria's information minister recently alleged the opposition parties were funding armed bandits and Boko Haram to cause widespread violence. Previous elections have been marred by irregularities and violence, in which hundreds have been killed. In some cases, the military have been accused of being partisan, especially to the government in power, an accusation the military has rejected.
The military was here and opposition win election. That same response, the same military that was around that time is still the same military. A party can come and go. The military remains. The military is not a government military. It's a Nigerian military. So if we say this is what we are doing to ensure that people go freely and vote, by now you should trust that the military is going to do the same, because we have done it before.
The discipline and impartiality of Nigeria's armed forces during the elections would be closely watched by election observers, especially the EU observers, who have gone the extra mile to train them on conduct during elections. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Ugandan human rights defenders are protesting the government's use of women to promote tourism to the country. The country's tourism minister announced they plan to attract visitors to the Miss Curvy beauty pageant, but rights defenders accuse the beauty contest of portraying women as sex objects. CGTN's Hilary Ayasiga reports.
Epitome of beauty, Miss Curvy, Uganda.
A campaign to promote Uganda's tourism. This time round, not wildlife attractions, but Uganda's curvy women. And Uganda's tourism ministry has indicated that it wants to adopt this strategy.
World over, it has been known that Ethiopia has one of the most beautiful women in the world. What is wrong if Honorable Chiwanda, as State Minister for Tourism, tells the world that in Uganda we have exceptional people?
But this has caused an uproar. A petition to have the contest stopped has gained over 1,500 signatures online.
I am calling for the Honorable Minister, Mr. Chiwanda, to offer an apology to the public and to cancel the pageant, because it has already sent out a very wrong message to young girls everywhere, to women everywhere, that, you know what, if a tourist has enough money, he'll come and do what? Pay for your goods. He'll come and pay to look at you. He'll come and pay to touch you, because he did not specify the limit.
And a debate is going on Kampala streets.
We are calling upon Cabinet to clarify to Ugandans whether they have changed their policy, their tourism policy, from marketing the natural tourist attractions, or
to sex tourism in this country.
I don't think people should take it as a bad thing or women being seen as sex object. Instead, they should welcome it and encourage every woman out there to be proud of how they look, of what they look, instead of women taking all these funny drugs to be small and they end up damaging their own organs.
I don't think it's the best way for us to attract tourists or to promote tourism in Uganda. So I'm against it for starters, and I feel it's very disrespectful to women.
The Ugandan government earns over $1.4 billion annually from tourism alone. And to keep this income flowing, it is designing various strategies to entice tourists. South Africa and Kenya have held similar pageants in the past, which led Uganda to introducing the Miss Cave pageant to showcase the beauty of an African queen. But the outcry from human rights defenders is how government is promoting it as a tourist attraction. They say the contest should instead focus on promoting women's rights. Hilary Yesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
In the north of Kenya, the El Molo people are found on the shores of Lake Turkana. It is a community facing extinction. Historians say few pure El Molo are left.
On a hill by the lake, deep in Kenya's north, sits a little village. El Molo Bay is the home of Kenya's smallest community, the El Molo people. The lake is their lifeblood. It feeds them and reminds them of the traditions that run in their blood. Traditionally, the El Molo lived on a diet of fish and crocodiles or turtles. Today, while a few keep goats, they still mostly depend on fish. The men go fishing every day on man-made rafts. Years of practice make it look effortless. They will eat some and sell the rest to meet their needs. But though they are successful today, the catch has dwindled through the years.
Fishing is our livelihood because that is what we depend on. But there are too many people now and there's not enough fish.
And there's more at risk. The El Molo language is at risk of extinction. The El Molo people are believed to have migrated to the Turkana Basin from Ethiopia. Emmanuel Lokolo is one of the older members of the community, but even he can only remember a few words of the old El Molo language.
Most of us only know one word or two in the El Molo language. Most of the older people who knew it have died, and the children are learning other languages in school. That is how a language dies.
The number of El Molo people is dwindling too. Kenya's 2009 census showed that there were 2,840 El Molo residents. Years before that, scientists believed there were only 8 unmixed El Molo people remaining. The elders say there are about 600 El Molo people in the village. There are other settlements in other regions. Many have married members of the local communities. They've given birth to mixed babies, and most in this village speak the Nilotic Samburu language of their neighbors. In this village, on the shores of the Lake Turkana, members of the El Molo community try to hold on to their culture and traditions and a way of life that they feel is slowly slipping away from them. Most days, children in the village receive short lessons after school. They are learning to speak El Molo. It is the community's way of fighting the threat of extinction. They believe if they keep the language and their traditions alive against the odds, then they can stop Kenya's smallest community from disappearing. Bulkisa Nyabwa, CGTN, Loyangalani, Kenya.
All right, let's now go to Uche Okoronkwa with the latest business news.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, India's Bharti Airtel unit set to merge with Telecom Kenya. And South Africa's retail sector faces heavy strain amidst a weakening economy.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year.
If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Kenya. The country's smallest mobile operator, Telecom Kenya, and India's Bharti Airtel unit, Airtel Networks, are set to merge into one unit. The agreement will see them combine their respective mobile, enterprise and carrier services in Kenya. Now, the proposed deal will operate under a joint venture company to be named Airtel Telcom. But Telecom Kenya's real estate portfolio and specific government services will not form part of the combined entity. However, it will still have the option to hold up to 49% stake of the shareholding. Now, the combined entity is expected to be chaired by Telcom CEO Mugo Kibati, while Airtel's Prasanta Sarma is set to be appointed as its CEO. And in Rwanda, the central bank has announced that the redesigned banknotes of 500 and 1,000 Rwandan francs are expected to go into circulation next week. Now, this follows last month's presidential order, which confirmed the new banknotes as legal tender. Now, the notes have improved security features as well as better quality to reduce wearing out. Across the world, governments have been investing in improving security features of their legal tender as counterfeiters improve on their techniques. Now, the rollout is expected to cost the Rwandan government about $6 million. Well, let's move on now to South Africa. The country's retail industry has been under significant strain recently. In fact, its weak economy has created tough trading conditions across the nation's food and fashion retail sectors. Now, this accounts for about 60% of South Africa's economy. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu breaking it all down for us.
Just a few months ago, it looked like the retail sector was making good sales and adding handsomely to growth in South Africa. But there's been a combination of factors that are now causing a decline. Consumers are battling to service debt and manage high transport and utility costs. Retailers are feeling the pinch with expensive rentals and rising electricity prices. Holding on to staff is also hitting the bottom line for many of these outlets. Even the likes of Shoprite, which caters for the low-income market, is under pressure.
Shoprite is not performing according to expectation. And then if you look in the same context, Pick n Pay has moved up. So which means it could be part of the market adjustment to better offers within the competitive landscape.
Retailers are operating in a tough trading environment. The economy remains weak. Unemployment is still increasing and consumers are cash-strapped.
Shoppers are holding back and spending only on basic needs like food. In recent weeks, fashion retail giant Edcon announced massive losses. No surprise, Woolworths also reported a slowdown in sales.
I've been analysing the market since the early 1980s, almost 40 years. And I have never seen a situation where you've seen such poor results on such a sustained basis. You've had competition from the foreigners coming in, notably companies like Cotton On from Australia, who've been very successful in taking market share away from the likes of an Edgar's, for example.
So people have kind of gone through the cycle of waiting for the best buy at the end of the season. And you find this odd phenomenon where some of us have purchased heavy winter merchandise, not at the start or even during the season, but at the end of the season, only to be put away in wardrobes to be brought out in the new season.
Unfortunately, the retail outlook is grim. Government is collecting lower revenues, which could see higher taxes announced in the new budget. Eskom is also asking for an increase in electricity tariffs. With conditions unlikely to improve in the near future, retailers will have to get creative or start cutting back themselves, which will only add to the country's unemployment crisis. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Tunisia now, where at least 1,000 delegates have converged for the Financing, Investment and Trade in Africa Forum. Now, key ministers and international investors are deliberating on ways to make intra-Africa trade successful and open up funding for diverse projects. Here's Adnan Shaoshi with more on that story.
Tunisia is hosting the second edition of the Financing, Investment and Trade in Africa Forum. The theme this year revolves around the acceleration of inter-African trade and investments. The high-level event was organized by the Tunisian African Business Council. Participants discussed ways to promote the inter-African trade that currently does not exceed 13% against rates of over 50% in the other continents.
The development of inter-African trade is facing three important challenges, namely the promotion of the continent's image, which for a long time has been associated with humanitarian crisis and turmoil in spite of its strong human potential and wealth of resources, the development of regional integration, and the promotion of investment.
TABC president indicated that funding, the lack of Tunisian diplomatic representation in Africa, logistics and transport remain the major problems impeding the development of Tunisian investments in Africa. Bassem Loukil noted that FITA conference also aims to discuss the funding mechanisms of African operators.
Inter-African rapprochement can only be achieved by setting up an important banking network and increasing ANC links to all the African countries. Best growth rates during the past years were recorded in Africa. Developing inter-African exchanges is important so as the added value will be exploited by the African population.
About 3,000 economic operators, 60 speakers and 30 international institutions took part in the forum.
I represent a platform of 25,000 African enterprises and SMEs in 31 countries who are looking for service providers, subcontractors and distributors. TABC and FTA 2019 has brought together Africans' economic actors to present concrete solutions to various difficulties and challenges which are hindering economic growth on the continent.
Experts have presented new alternative funding solutions, development capital, crowdfunding, insurance credit that can complement the African traditional banking offer.
On the occasion of ITA 2019, the Tunisian government has reiterated its commitment to support all programs and projects aimed to step up trade with Africa. Experts assert that the development of investments in this continent with promising prospects can contribute to the creation of jobs for youth and to economic growth. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And on the international front, let's get the latest on Brexit. Now, British Prime Minister Theresa May has met with EU leaders in Brussels for further talks. She's hoping to put her Brexit plans back on course. However, following their meeting, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said the EU will not reopen negotiations over the withdrawal agreement. Here's CGTN's Mariam Zaidi with the latest from Brussels.
If UK Prime Minister Theresa May needed any rminder that there were only 50 days till Brexit, protesters ambushed her car on arrival in Brussels. Inside, if looks could kill, both the EU and the UK are locked in a stalemate over the Irish backstop. May's mission here was to win legal changes to the withdrawal agreement.
The Prime Minister described the context in the UK Parliament and the motivation behind last week's vote in the House of Commons, seeking a legally binding change to the terms of the backstop. She raised various options for dealing with these concerns.
But in a written statement following the meeting with Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU reconfirmed once again that the withdrawal agreement would not be reopened, but they were open to finding solutions. Her next meeting with EU Parliament officials brought much the same.
It's important that Mrs. May today in the meeting assured us that there will be a backstop. That what she said already in Belfast, there is no question to remove the backstop. Because that is absolutely necessary for securing and safeguarding the Good Friday Agreement, safeguarding the internal market and safeguarding also the peace process.
EU Council President Donald Tusk, who on Wednesday caused a riot over his comments pondering what the special place in hell looked like for those who promoted Brexit, didn't have much to say following his face-to-face with the British Prime Minister. As he tweeted no breakthrough was in sight, May had this.
I've set out very clearly the positions in Parliament that we must have legally binding changes to the withdrawal agreement in order to deal with Parliament's concerns over the backstop. What I see and hear from leaders is a desire for us to work together to ensure that we can deliver the UK leaving the European Union with a deal. My work is to deliver Brexit, to deliver it on time, and I'm going to be negotiating hard in the coming days to do just that.
Whereas those in Brussels show little willing, perhaps German Chancellor Angela Merkel can provide hope for change. Speaking from Bratislava on Thursday, she said she believes a solution to the Irish border issue can be reached in Brexit negotiations without reopening the withdrawal agreement. Mariam Zaidi, CGTN, Brussels.
Meanwhile, Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos has accused the National Enquirer and its publisher David Pecker of extortion and blackmail. Now, the magazine owned by American media published an expose on Bezos' relationship with former TV anchor Lauren Sanchez. Now, the billionaire, who also owns the Washington Post newspaper, said AMI had wanted him to make a false public statement that the National Enquirer's coverage of him and his mistress was not politically motivated. Now, Bezos is currently the world's richest man with a net worth of roughly $136 billion US. Well, that's all for now in Africa Live Biz, but coming up on Global Business Africa, Egypt's cabinet plans a fund to finance the development of its state-owned enterprises. Of course, we'll bring you more on that top of the hour. For now, back to you.
Thank you, Uche. This is Africa Live on CGTN, and yes, we have more news coming your way after the break. Here's what's ahead. Mandela's life and legacy celebrated in London exhibition.
Join us in Global Business. See Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. A special exhibition about Nelson Mandela's life and legacy has been opened in London. The interactive exhibition takes a journey through Mandela's life, including his upbringing in rural Eastern Cape as the son of a chief. It also features previously unseen footage alongside more than 150 artifacts. Let's take a look.
Madiba's items such as clothes, campaign posters and travel documents have been loaned to the exhibition. The family of the Nobel Peace Prize winner wants everyone to be able to commemorate his life as a freedom fighter. His grandson Mandela Mandela hopes the exhibition will inspire a sense of action and accountability in the younger generations.
My grandfather, during his presidential years, he wore a watch, a Philip Patek watch. And I've made that watch available because he gave me that watch, and I think he was such a committed person and always on time and always held up time, and he was never late for any commitment. Even when he traveled abroad, his watch remained on South African time, which we found hilarious as a family. But that watch is also here on display. Madiba may no longer be with us, but the fight continues. We need to champion the work that he represented. He was a global icon for justice, peace, and fought for human rights. And we need to take the stand to speak out.
London is the first city to host the touring show before it is permanently mounted in Mandela's birthplace, Mvezo. Both locals and tourists here hope to learn a thing or two from South Africa's former president's life journey.
It is critical for us to remember this person, to learn from his lessons, to learn from his legacy. It's our generation's responsibility to ensure that we record history for generations to come, to understand the character and to understand the glorious human achievement of Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela was an iconic freedom fighter, and even though he passed on a few years ago, his family hopes that his memory will remain fresh in many people's minds by holding such exhibitions. For CGTN, I am Wilkis Tanyabwa.
All right, we've got your sports news coming up after the break. Let's take a sneak peek at the headline. Tributes pour in for Argentinian footballer Emiliano Sala, who died in an air accident.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken,